Well, good evening and welcome back to the Johnson Space Center as we hit the top of the stretch in Discovery's flight to the International Space Station and our mission status briefing for this evening. To wrap things up, with us to talk about entry and landing preparations is the Entry Flight Director, Richard Jones. Richard?
Rob, thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for having me. As you all know, the STS-128 mission is coming here to a close very shortly, and the ground team and the on-orbit crew is preparing to bring Discovery home tomorrow. And as you've been hearing each day from the flight directors and the mission management team members who have been briefing you here each day, there's been nothing but superlatives that you can attribute to this mission. And I'm here to really tell you more of the same. All we've had is really good news. The crew's doing great, and the ground team's ready. So just want to kind of go through some things to help set up the entry strategy for tomorrow. But first, I want to kind of start off with some of the things that happened today. We had a really good FCS checkout, flight control system checkout, and hot fire. We hot fired all of the primary jets that we could possibly use tomorrow, and everything checked out very clean. During the FCS checkout, during the first portion of that, when we're running the auxiliary power unit and we do some secondary actuator checks that really shake the vehicle up, we did lose a piece of debris. The crew did capture that in some still shots, and they sent that down to the ground. We were able to take a look at those shots, and we weren't able to come to a definitive conclusion as far as what that object was, but we definitively came to the conclusion that it is not a thermal protection system or a piece of the thermal protection system. So really, from that perspective, we're in a very good configuration. We got more good news as the day progressed today. The damage assessment team, or the DAT team, they were able to give us great news from the standpoint that their late inspection results, they had finished those up today. They had done a very thorough job of analyzing the data, as they always do. And they looked at the wing leading edge and the nose cap systems, and all of that is clean. There are no leans against the TPS, so the vehicle is ready to come home. From a consumables perspective, we have a lot of consumables on board. In fact, we have the amount of consumables that can take us out through Sunday into mission +3. And so hopefully we won't have to use all of those, but we will be I guess, benefiting from that capability from the standpoint that if we need to use them, we can. So let me kind of talk through the weather scenario that we've got lined up. The weather tomorrow, as the following few days at Kennedy Space Center, is going to be challenging. Just like any time period here in the late summer, when the sun's out and the daytime heating effects are kind of boiling up the atmosphere a little bit, we can expect some rain or some thunderstorms within the area. Hopefully those thunderstorms are going to be staying away outside of our 30 nautical mile flight rule circle that we have to keep them out of. We had a great chance to look at the weather today as it was streaming in the Kennedy Space Center area. And you can kind of see some lines of convergence or streams of thunderstorms as they were kind of coming into the area. But as they were coming in, you could definitely see some areas of dryness or some clearing. Hopefully that same condition will be there tomorrow. Now, it's going to be a little bit iffy in terms of whether that dryness will be there or not, but if it is, that could work in our favor. On the other side of the continental United States, Edwards is going to have great weather from basically from here on out through into mission +3. That is likely not to be a concern for us. But weather is weather. You have to look at it every day, and you have to study it and make sure that your assumptions are still the same. That's what we're going to do, and we're going to kind of factor everything together. But with the end of mission +3 consumables at our disposal, and the fact that we've got 2 KSC opportunities tomorrow and the great Edwards weather, that's all we're going to look at tomorrow. Is we're only going to look at KSC for our end of mission. And maybe it's a good time that we can go ahead and show you those ground tracks. Here's our first opportunity. It's on orbit 202. The deorbit burn is at 4:59 Central, landing approximately at 6:05 p.m. Central. This first opportunity is in daylight. The crew will actually have good daylight conditions, and they will beat sunset for this particular opportunity by 30 minutes. So we won't have to rely on the xenon lights to provide a good environmental view out the window for the crew for this particular landing. And if we can go to the next opportunity, this is Rev 203. Its deorbit burn is occurring at 6:36 p.m. Central, with a landing approximately at 7:42 p.m. Central. And as you can see, it's traversing right over the Houston area here and coming across the United States, heading into Kennedy Space Center. So those are some really neat views if we were to have to use that particular landing opportunity. That last opportunity on orbit 203 is a dark landing. It's approximately 1 hour past sunset, so that's something that we will have to factor in. Normally, weather is such that, when the sun goes down, things start to calm down from a weather perspective. That may not happen tomorrow. We'll see if that is the case. But that may be something that could work in our favor. If you remove the daytime heating aspects of things, the weather tends to settle down a little bit. So hopefully we'll be looking at a lot of things to go in our favor. So with that, with 2 KSC opportunities in front of us tomorrow, we're going to be looking at the weather if we don't come in tomorrow. And our pick'em day will most likely be on end of mission +2 or Saturday. That is the initial thought process that we're going to be going into tomorrow's landing with, but we're going to reassess that and see if there's any conditions that would possibly change that to move it up a day, possibly to end of mission +1. Again, there's a lot of factors that we have to look at, but that could be a scenario that could happen. The folks, the landing convoy support folks, the facility folks out at Edwards are ready to support that if indeed we need to call them up. But again, I'd like to stress we would like to go out as far as possible looking at KSC if that is what is required, and we could possibly go to Saturday if that is the case before calling up Edwards for a landing opportunity on end of mission +2. You heard a great briefing from the boundary layer transition team members earlier right now. I can't even do that justice. They did a great job of getting you up to speed on that. We are ready to support that DTO. And finally, I just want to close with one other item. As we're coming into our deorbit preparations tomorrow, the entry team, as we're getting ready to get into the deorbit prep checklist, excuse me, the HTV launch is scheduled for 12:01 p.m. Central. So we'll know how that mission is coming along, and I know the ISS community is very excited about that new capability. So from an entry perspective, what we're worrying about is relative motion concerns, making sure that we don't have any conjunction capabilities with respect to that HTV. We've taken a look at that, and there are none at all. Obviously, the sooner that we can get out of orbit and get back safely on the ground, that just frees up more assets for the HTV and the ISS to use from a TDRS perspective. So really, that's my summary. Hopefully, I've been able to answer most of your questions, but I'd be happy to take them now if you have any.
Thanks, Richard. And the Japanese flight control team gave the green light a few hours ago to fuel the H-2B rocket and to roll it to the pad. Rollout is just a few hours from now in advance of the anticipated launch tomorrow. We'll start off here with Gina.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. Have you had the crew do any kind of power downs to extend what they have, or it's not necessary at all?
The power downs that we would be putting in place, we could do a more severe power down, a Group C, but we don't think we'd have to do that. We would have to put a standard Group B power down in place to make sure that we have end of mission +3 capability. our limiting consumable is lithium hydroxide, and we've got quite a bit of cryogenic margin on top of that. And really, when you do that power down, it's to save the cryogenic margin or make sure that it's still there. So we would have to put in a minor power down on subsequent deorbit days, but it's really not our top concern.
Robert.
Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com. I think there was a call earlier when Rick Sturkow was being briefed about the weather that there was a mention of a crosswinds DTO, and can you just remind us what that is?
Sure. If we do get the opportunity to come home tomorrow to KSC, the crosswinds are forecasted to be, I believe, 11 knots. And we have a standard DTO that's on the books that we've been carrying for years to try and characterize the handling qualities in the 2-point stance when the vehicle first touches down. And so as a result of that, if those conditions are present and if the crosswinds are 10 knots or greater, and when I say 10 knots or greater, obviously they're going to have to be inside of 15 knots for end emission. So if they're inside of that range, at least for the first opportunity under the daylight conditions, we would delay the deployment of the drag chute until the nose gear is on the ground. That way we can get a full-up assessment of the handling qualities of the vehicle under those high crosswind conditions. For the later opportunity, that window of opportunity kind of constricts. For the dark opportunity, we can only sustain a 12-knot crosswind, which is still within limits, but the chances of having something like that maybe diminish a little bit just from the standpoint as when the sun goes down, the winds tend to die down a little bit as well. So that's really what we're looking at tomorrow.
Okay, we have reporters on the phone bridge. Let's start off with Bill Harwood.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Two from me, if I could. Did Christer indicate any idea of the rough vicinity of where that debris came from? I mean, upper orbiter or aft? Any ideas at all?
Yeah, you know, Bill, he characterized it coming from the. He couldn't really characterize it if it was coming from the payload bay or the orbiter itself. He was unsure of where the original destination, but it was definitely aft, and I believe it was on the port side of the vehicle. So that was how he described that. You know, when a small object comes out like that, it's first of all, it's very difficult to even characterize the size of that debris, and he gave us 3 to 4 inches in length. I did take a look at the pictures, and it is looking about that size if you were to kind of stare at it for a little bit. But you know, from its origination point just aft and port of the vehicle, whether or not it was from the payload bay or not, that distinction wasn't made.
Thanks. And one more for me on how the Pick'em Day works. If you're only calling up KSC for tomorrow, obviously, and if the weather stays the same, my presumption from what you said is you would only try KSC on Friday, and then Saturday would be the day you got to land somewhere. Is that interpreting that correctly?
That is a correct interpretation. If the weather out at Edwards continues to look as good as it does, it continues to be our ace in the hole. That would be the conditions where you'd continue to look at KSC as long as you could.
Thank you very much. That's it from me.
Okay, next up, Tarek Malik.
Thank you very much, Tarek Malik from Space.com and Space News. I think I have 2 quick ones as well. Richard, you mentioned earlier that you are going to target Saturday for your Pick'em Day, but depending on conditions, you could move up for Friday. And I guess to follow on Bill's question, I guess independent of Edwards, would I guess a bleak forecast at Kennedy also on Saturday affect anything, or in terms of moving up to Friday, or would you just kind of stick to that goal?
Could be a condition, Tarek, that could possibly get us to think about intermission plus 1 as being our Pick'em Day. But again, I would consider that a little bit remote, but you're thinking along the right lines. Something like that could enter the thought process for that. Thanks.
And if you could just, I guess, remind us just the desirability of returning an orbiter back to KC rather than landing in California. Just kind of, why that is always your preference for the first couple goes. Thanks.
Yeah, obviously Kennedy Space Center is the highest priority from a programmatic and a flight rule perspective. Anytime that you want to get the vehicle back home to its home, that's the best way that you can possibly get things. Obviously, the next mission, STS-131, is eagerly awaiting Discovery, so that's another reason to help the turnaround. Obviously, the turnaround manifest ensuing from that. So there's a lot of good reasons that you want to make sure that you get into KSC. But you know, if the weather doesn't cooperate, we'll go to the place where the weather is safe.
Thank you.
Okay, on to Irene Klotz.
Thanks, Rob. Sorry if you already said this, but do you have an idea of what the weather concerns for tomorrow specifically are going to be?
Yes, Irene, the weather concerns, all of the ceilings and the winds, the surface winds, are within flight rule limits. The main concern is going to be the chance of thunderstorms within a 30 nautical mile boundary that surrounds the shuttle landing facility. As I was describing a little bit earlier, the thunderstorms that were streaming into the area today, they were behaving pretty much like you expect them as they're coming out off of the Atlantic onto land. That is probably going to be one of the signatures or the characteristics or the mechanisms that is going to be affecting the weather tomorrow as well. I failed to mention one thing. I'll just add another thing. A lot of the activity is, if it's going to be there, it's going to be coming up from the south. That was the same weather activity that was there today. So we expect that same trend to be there tomorrow, and hopefully it'll stay to the south.
Thanks. And would you just refresh my memory if there's some flight rules about not having lightning within a certain period of time or for a certain period of time before you'd make a call for a deorbit burn like there is for launching?
It's a similar flight rule that encompasses lightning. Obviously, a thunderstorm, any time that you have a thunderstorm, it can have lightning, it cannot. There are definitions in terms of what a thunderstorm is. The cloud top temperatures are the real, I guess, definition of what a thunderstorm is from a flight rule perspective. If the cloud top temperatures at the top, in terms of wherever that thunderstorm bubbles up to, if it is colder than minus 20 degrees Celsius, then it kind of meets the characteristics or it meets the conditions where you would call it a thunderstorm. It may not have lightning in it. It is likely to have thunder or precipitation in it, but really that's the main discriminator that causes you to call something a thunderstorm. If it does have lightning, it's still a thunderstorm from our perspective. So really, it doesn't mean too much other than, you know, the presence of lightning is, it's an active thunderstorm, and you really don't want to get anywhere close to that.
Thanks, that's interesting. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, and last but not least, James Dean.
Thank you, Rob. Just regarding these thunderstorms, obviously you're hoping to catch a break, but I just wondered if you could any further characterize your confidence level at this point. I mean, does it look like it'll take a great stroke of luck, or is it kind of 50-50 or worse or better? Can you offer anything along those lines?
James, I hate to put a number on things. I wouldn't characterize it as a stroke of luck. I would like to just stick with the description of it being very challenging. You know, I've had a chance to stare at weather working as a weather flight director and as a ascent and entry flight director on other missions. And, you know, weather's weather, and you have to kind of watch it and make sure that it's behaving in the manner that you want it to. And tomorrow, you know, since it is going to be a challenging case, what I really mean by that is it's going to look somewhat nasty. It's not going to look go in the early portions of the deorbit prep. We're going to be looking for maybe a trend where it's dissipating as we get closer to the deorbit burn, looking for that area of dryness that I was trying to communicate earlier. So I just want to stick with the description that it will be challenging.
Got it. Thanks. I think we heard that the outlook was worse on Friday, and so I'm not sure if I understood how that impacts your decision to call up Edwards Friday or not. Would you be already looking towards Saturday at that point and just go through another day?
You know, as I tend to think about a launch that we recently had. I was working with my colleague Norm Knight. I was his weather flight director for a previous launch, and we walked in that day, and the weather forecast was 80% no-go, and we lifted off that day. And that is the reasoning why you have to kind of stare at things, look at them, and kind of take things with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that the forecasting job is extremely difficult, but when they're forecasting, when the weather forecasts are looking at a particular area, it's very hard to drill down to the microscopic level, and it isn't microscopic, but a smaller scale level of a 30 nautical mile circle around a particular landing site, and make a forecast for a specific time frame where weather is going to be there or not going to be there. It may look terrible all around it, but it might be perfect within that 30 nautical mile circle. Those are the circumstances where even though the forecaster is forecasting that there's going to be a lot of moisture, a lot of their term precipitable water in the atmosphere that could migrate from the south up to the north. Yes, from that perspective, the outlook for the further days outside of Thursday for Friday and Saturday do have that propensity for a little bit more precipitable water in them. But again, you got to look at it and make sure that it shows what it's forecasted to show. So again, I take things with a grain of salt any time that I see some numbers or some probabilities associated with weather.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple more questions. Do you have, is it 2 landing opportunities each day? And if you've called up Edwards, do you generally have to just pick one for those 2, one site for those 2, or can you try one first and then the other?
Well, the deorbit opportunities line up differently each day. In particular, for end of mission, there's 2 KSC opportunities followed separately by Edwards opportunities after that. That's really the typical setup. Sometimes there's an overlap between the second Kennedy Space Center and the first Edwards opportunity. I don't think that shows up until, I believe, end of mission +2. So under those circumstances, we could look at 4 end of mission +2 if we get there on Saturday. We could possibly look at a Kennedy Space Center landing opportunity, and if that isn't cooperating, the next deorbit opportunity after that, we could choose either between an Edwards or a KSC opportunity. But if we go that far, we're obviously going to be looking at Edwards a lot harder.
Right. Okay. And last, I just wondered if you could describe a little bit, when you talk about calling up Edwards, exactly what that actually entails in terms of, as I understand, a certain amount of manpower has to get positioned to be ready to receive the shuttle when it lands.
That's a part of it. We do have a lot of people that deploy from the Landing and Recovery Division out at the Kennedy Space Center out to the different CONUS landing sites. When they go out to Edwards, they're pretty much already there, so they know how to handle the vehicle just like they do when it's back at home, and they're the experts on how to do that. There's a big team that basically gets ready, makes a checkout of all of the convoy instruments and vehicles that are used to process the vehicle after it touches down and hits wheel stop at the end of the runway. Towing it off the vehicle, getting it ready for the ferry flight, it obviously is the next part of that convoy. The second part of the equation is securing the runway itself. Obviously, Edwards is a runway that we share with the Air Force, and so that is the second part of it when we actually say, you know, well, we're asking the Air Force to give the runway to us, and we secure the amount of time around that appropriately so that we can get the convoy staged and shut off the Air Force operations so that we could possibly use the runway if necessary. So really, that's kind of a high-level high-level description of what we do when we call up a landing site.
Okay, I believe that's it on the phone bridge. I don't think we have any follow-ups here. So we'll wrap up with a couple of programming notes. Discovery's crew will begin its 8-hour sleep period at 2 a.m. Central Time on Thursday. That's the same time that we'll start our flight day highlights, an hourly replay of the highlights of today's final full day in orbit, we believe, for Discovery's crew. The crew gets its wake-up call at 9:59 a.m. Central Time on Thursday to begin deorbit and landing preparations. And as Richard alluded to at the beginning, the Japanese HTV launch, the maiden launch of that new cargo ship for the International Space Station, is on tap for Thursday. Our launch coverage on NASA television begins at 11:45 a.m. Central Time for an expected liftoff at 12:01 p.m. Central Time, 2:01 a.m. Japan time on Friday, September 11th. You can follow all the activities of the Space Shuttle and the Space Station, and this mission in particular, on our website at www.nasa.gov. We'll see you back here tomorrow for entry and landing coverage. Thanks a lot.